Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give folks just a minute to join us, but we welcome you to today's webinar. As I pause for people to log in, you are welcome to go into the chat box where you can introduce yourself. We encourage you to share your name, role, and organization so our presenters get a sense of who's here. But again, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We're pleased that you came to learn more about the Teaching Fractions Toolkit. So to introduce myself, my name is Emily Loney. I'm the communications lead with Regional Educational Laboratory, or REL Midwest. And today's webinar is Strategies and Tools for Teaching Fractions with Confidence from the Teaching Fractions Toolkit, what we refer to as TFT. So in our deck, you'll hear us talk about that. Again, as you join, you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat, and thank you again for taking time from your afternoon. Next slide. We have a great set of presenters who will be speaking with us today. We have Yinmei Wan, the Partnership Director and Evaluation Lead for the Teaching Fractions Toolkit, Pamela Buffington, our Toolkit Development Lead and Professional Learning Facilitator, Johanna Nicola, our Toolkit Developer and Professional Learning Facilitator, and we're especially pleased to have Morgan Allen, a Math Instructional Partner or Math Coach from Cincinnati Public Schools, to share her on-the-ground perspective on working with the Fractions Toolkit and the experience of educators. Next slide, please. Just to orient you to our webinar, again, people are actively introducing yourself in the chat. We welcome you to continue to use that. You can also use the chat if you have any tech problems. We're going to be using the Q&A option for Zoom. So if you have any questions that come up as our presenters are talking, we encourage you to go to the Zoom controls with the Q&A button. You can submit questions there, and we'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the webinar. We have time reserved at the end for discussion, but also can address questions that come up. We also have live closed captioning available for this webinar, which you can access by clicking the closed caption button. Next slide. So as I walk through the agenda, we wanted to also launch a poll just to hear from you about what kind of experience you and the folks around you might have had with fractions. So the poll question is, in your experience, how often do students struggle with fractions concepts? Rarely, sometimes, often, or almost often. So again, as I walk through the agenda, feel free to submit your answer. We'll be sharing those as we launch into the introduction to the toolkit. On today's webinar, we'll do a brief introduction of REL Midwest and the Teaching Fractions Toolkit. We'll do a deeper dive into the toolkit resources and show you some really on-the-ground fraction strategies that you could take home and apply this afternoon, working with students or with your educators. We'll hear from Morgan about her experience working with the toolkit and some of the challenges she sees with fractions instructions. We'll highlight an opportunity for districts and schools to work with REL Midwest later this year, and then have time for discussion. So it should be a great hour together learning about fractions. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague Yinmei. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the webinar. So before we dive into the Teaching Fractions Toolkit, I want to spend a few minutes orienting you to the REL Midwest, who we are and how our work may be useful to you and your organization. Next slide, please. Next. So the Regional Educational Laboratories, or RELs, are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. There are 10 RELs across the country, and together we partner with educators and policymakers nationwide. REL work is intentionally change-oriented. It's designed to support real decisions about policies, programs, and practices that can improve outcomes for learners. So this map shows the 10 REL regions and the states each serves. Next slide, please. REL Midwest is one of those 10 labs, and we serve Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So we work closely with state education agencies, districts, schools, and other education organizations throughout the region to ensure our work responds to real and high priority needs. Next slide. At REL Midwest, our work centers on helping educators use data and research more effectively. We conduct applied research, we provide technical support, and engage directly with partners around shared priorities. A big or a central part of our approach is partnership. We collaborate with state education agencies, districts and schools, and other education organizations in the region to make sure our work is relevant and useful. So ultimately, we aim to solve practical problems while also building a strong understanding of what works in education with the goal of improving outcomes for both students and teachers in the region. Next slide, please. So now that you have some context on REL Midwest, I'll transition us to today's focus, the Teaching Fractions Toolkit. Next slide, please. So this toolkit builds on a prior What Works Clearinghouse practice guide and is designed to support educators in implementing evidence-based fractions instructions. The toolkit includes professional learning modules, opportunities for reflection and self-assessment, and materials districts can use for professional development. Before I say more about the toolkit, let's watch a short video that provides a brief overview of the toolkit.
Fraction instruction in middle school and elementary school often focuses on learning procedures, such as helping students know when to cross-multiply or when to invert and multiply. But research has shown that when students are taught strategies to visually represent fraction problems, they develop a deeper conceptual understanding of what's going on in the problems, and they're much more likely to solve them accurately. When students use visual representations to think about fractions conceptually, you'll see them drawing pictures and diagrams and working with hands-on materials. You'll see them discussing the math with each other and describing how they reached their answer. But to implement these recommendations in the classroom, teachers need professional development opportunities to gain experience using these types of representations themselves. To help teachers bring these types of experiences to their students, we developed 6 professional development modules for 6th grade teachers, along with supporting resources that are based on the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide for developing effective fraction instruction for kindergarten through 8th grade.
Now that you hear a little bit more about the toolkit, let me get to explain why we focus on fractions. Next slide, please. I think it's a good time to Devin or Corey to pull up the poll results, maybe at this point. Yeah, so the results echoes what many of you may already know. So we know US students' math performance has struggled for many years, and the fractions are particularly persistent challenge, especially as students transition into middle grades content focused on ratios and proportions. Many of you have experienced this firsthand. Students often struggle to see fractions as numbers, and strategies that work well for whole numbers don't always transfer automatically for students. Research also tells us that professional learning that deepens teachers' understanding of fractions and how to teach them effectively is critical. That's the gap this toolkit is designed to address. Next slide, please. So the Teaching Fractions Toolkit was designed to support understanding and implementation of the Developing Effective Fractions instructions in kindergarten through grade 8 practice guide. We'll share the link in the chat so you can explore the guide alongside the toolkit resources. So practice guides synthesize research, expert input, and practitioner experience into actionable recommendations. This particular guide includes 5 key recommendations, ranging from using number nines as central tools to prioritizing teacher professional development around fractions. Next slide, please. The Teaching Fractions Toolkit includes 2 main sets of supports. First, there are supports specifically for grade 6 teachers, which focus directly on classroom instruction. Second, there are supports for leaders that span grade levels from K to 8 and are designed to help districts and schools implement and sustain this work. All components, I should mention that all components were co-developed and refined based on educator feedback. Next slide. The core of the toolkit includes 6 professional development modules for teachers. These modules range from foundational concepts like fractions on number 9 to instructional implementation related to fraction computations and rates, ratio, and proportions. Together, these modules are designed to build conceptual understanding as well as to support teachers' classroom application of these recommendations. Next slide. Each module includes multiple components to support teacher learning and transfer to their practice. For example, each module includes exploration of math tasks, opportunities to analyze student work, formative assessments tools, lesson planning supports, reflection tools, as well as interactive online apps developed specifically for this toolkit. The goal is to help educators move from understanding to application. Next slide. So the 6 modules are structured similarly. Each module spans approximately 2 weeks and includes 2 facilitated meetings with asynchronous activities to be completed by teachers between those 2 meetings. For example, Module 1 focuses on recommendation 2 of the practice guide. The recommendation 2 states, help students recognize that fractions are numbers and that they expand the number system beyond whole numbers. Use number nines as a central representation tool in teaching this and other fraction concepts from the early grades onward. So this Module 1 centers around this recommendation. The topic will be introduced in the first meeting 1A. Then participants will have an opportunity to work on related tasks and strategies. Then during the next meeting 1B, the tasks will be like debriefed and an understanding of the recommendation will be deepened in that meeting. Next slide. In addition to teacher professional learning resources, the toolkit also includes supports and resources for leaders. These include facilitator guides, very detailed, informational videos and handouts, and checklists that help leaders monitor conditions for effective implementation of the practice guide recommendations. These resources are designed to support high-quality facilitation and sustainability. Next slide. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Pam and Johanna, who were our lead developers of the toolkit. Pam and Johanna will walk through specific toolkit resources and highlight fraction strategies in action.
Okay, so while we pull up those slides, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Johanna Nicola. I'm part of the development and facilitation team for the Teaching Fractions Toolkit. And now what we're going to do is my colleague Pam Buffington and I are going to tell you a little more about the specific resources available in the Teaching Fraction Toolkit and some of the types of strategies and ideas that are featured to give you some examples of what you can expect. So the Teaching Fraction Toolkit includes extensive resources to support professional development focused on these essential strategies for fraction instruction. And so everything that is needed for the professional development is there. This includes things like a detailed facilitator guide, slide decks, and a participant workbook with all the session handouts. The PD also incorporates a teacher reflection tool that supports teachers to reflect on their learning about the research-based recommendations throughout their participation. Next slide. So the facilitator guide itself, it has detailed guidance for facilitators. So if a facilitator wants to lead a group, they can pick this up and it will support them with everything they need to know to lead a group of teachers through the professional learning. For example, for every module, there is a detailed and annotated agenda for each of the 2 meetings that are in that module. And there are also instructions for each activity within each meeting that include things like tips and notes about what to emphasize to make sure that the connections to those research-based recommendations are coming through. There's also, to go with that facilitator guide, there's a participant workbook for each module. So this contains all of the handouts, resources, and links that teachers will need as they participate in the Teaching Fractions Toolkit professional development. These workbooks can be printed to be used as hard copies to write on, but they're also set up as fillable PDFs so that if it's easier for teachers to work on them electronically, that works as well. The workbooks include handouts and resources needed during each meeting, but also for the interim activities that teachers complete between meetings. So then also there, to go with the facilitator guides and the teacher workbooks, there are slide decks that are available to guide the work in each meeting. So these slide decks include slide notes that will support the facilitators in knowing what's most important to highlight with each slide and in each activity. But the slides are also customizable so that if there's specific details for your context that you need to add in, or there's a specific platform you want to use for teacher sharing or information about next meetings, that's possible to do. So now I'm going to turn it to Pam, who's going to share some examples of the kinds of activities we explore in this professional learning.
Thank you, Johanna. What we have here are screenshots of a couple of the apps that we have available. All of the online interactive apps are freely available to use during the professional learning, but also beyond that. They are licensed under Creative Commons and can be adapted as necessary, but were designed specifically for the content of this work. And in fact, we know that these apps may help students to understand concepts underlying computational procedures and the reasons why these procedures work. They can reinforce understanding of fractions as numbers by visually illustrating the fraction magnitude on number lines. And we'll be looking at a couple of examples of this with you together momentarily. They also include immediate visual feedback and rapid iteration. That is very helpful as some students struggle to subdivide number lines accurately or create drawings. These are not meant to substitute for hands-on manipulatives, but to enhance and extend that work. They also are suitable for both demonstration purposes as well as inquiry-based explorations. And we have those included within the activities and the workbooks as well. These tools also support student problem solving because they can represent visual representations of a variety of different fractions when we are engaged in fraction computation, fraction comparison, locating them on a number line, and so on. So the activity that I'd like you all to do with us is to look at this particular set of comparisons and take a moment to reflect and make note. We want to know if you're thinking about comparing 5, 6, and 7/8, for example, what strategy would you use and which fraction is greater or less than the other? The same is true for 5/12 and 3/5 and 2/5 and 4/10. So I'm going to pause for a moment, which is very difficult for me. And I will allow you a couple of minutes to think about this, write down your solution, and make note of your solution strategy. Okay. I'm sure that in many cases, we could spend quite a lot of time thinking about these problems, but what I'm going to ask folks to do is there will be a poll popping up, and I'd like you to identify all of the strategies that you use for these three sets of fractions. Can we have the live results presented, please?
Sure. So far, the leader would be finding common denominators with 74%, then followed by benchmark fractions, just giving folks a chance to respond to the questions. And then next would be visual representations. So those are the top three right now.
Excellent, thank you. What I'm going to do is switch over to apps and actually demonstrate some of these strategies and the strength of the apps. On the screenshot that I showed you earlier, we have the ability to have interactive apps used for a variety of the topics here. And we're going to focus in on the Comparing Fractions app. As you can see here, there are sliders that allow us to adjust the numerators and denominators of fractions and compare them. In the first example, we had 5, 6. So I'm going to demonstrate what that would look like as a fraction. So this would be 5, 6. And we're going to compare it to 7, 8. So I'm going to adjust the denominator and the numerator to get to that fraction. One of the things that I want to point out is this is an example where we've done extensive research about misunderstandings and overgeneralizations that students can have for fractions. Some students will look at this and notice there's just one piece missing between 5, 6 and 6, 6 or the whole, and one piece missing with 7, 8 and 8, 8 for the whole. So some students might think that this is equal. We know, however, that if we look at an area model, that in fact 5, 6 is less than 7, 8 because the piece that's missing in 5, 6 is greater than the 7, 8. By having students be able to look at the visual model and see that in fact these are different and the 5, 6 are less than the 7, 8, it's very beneficial to them. We also have the ability to look at these same fractions on a number line and notice that 5, 6 is less than 7, 8 on a number line. And in this case, the visual representation of the size of the piece is a great strategy. While students can create a common denominator for these fractions, we in fact encourage them to use reasoning and what we know about the size of a fraction to help them to make decisions. So in this case, 5, 6 is less than 7, 8. What we have in this app are multiple layers of support. So in addition to being able to see the visuals, to talk about that strategy, we can also check the result and also show it in words to help reinforce that this symbol is less than that. So what I'm going to do now is to change to the second example. In the second example, we had 5/12 compared to 3/5. So if we look at 5/12, I'm going to just, well, let's go with 5/12 and 3/5. If we look at this example and look at an area model, it's really obvious with the visual that 3/5 is greater than 5/12. But some students may in fact use a different strategy. They may notice that 5/12 is less than 3/5 because they compare to the benchmark fraction. So for example, we know that halfway on this 0 to 1 number line is 1/2. 5, 6 is 5/12 is 1 less than 6/12, which is 1/2. 3/5 is the same thing as 6/10, which in fact is just beyond the half. So students may be able to use this visual and that benchmark of a half strategy to help solve this problem. And these visuals help to illustrate that. And the final example we could take a look at is looking at 2/5 and we look at 4/10. And in this particular case, you can see that if we look at the app, they're the same exact length. What's nice about this is not only does it demonstrate that these are equivalent fractions, we can use the tools here to show that if in fact I were to split this 2/5 up into, draw the line here, and you can see that there are in fact 2/5 is the same thing as 4/10. You can also illustrate it on the number line as well. One of the other things that's really helpful in these examples is that you can illustrate things like the difference between a unit fraction, let's just say fourths or eighths, and what that looks like in terms of 1/8. I'm going to just adjust this here. 1/8 versus 2/8 versus 3/8 and so on, both as an area model or tape diagram and on the number line. So with that, you can get a good sense about how on the fraction, we may look at this and have lots of different strategies and how in fact visual models can help support deepened understanding of those ideas. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Johanna again.
Okay, so Pam was sharing about some of the interactive apps and some of the strategies that they help to highlight. I want to talk about another resource that's key in the toolkit, and that is some formative assessment tools. And this is important because, of course, if we're going to use strategies with students, we also need to have ways to understand what students are understanding or not understanding, so we know what we're going to work with them around. Just move this so I can access it. Sorry about that. Okay. So these formative assessment tools, they're brief sets of items that focus on common student misunderstandings related to fractions. And these are designed so that teachers can use these with students fairly quickly, just takes 10 to 15 minutes. And it's a set of items that students answer, where then teachers can look at their responses and learn some things about how they're reasoning about these fractions problems and which of the common misunderstandings that have been identified by research they might have. So for example, I've got up on the screen right now one item from one of the formative assessments, and it's asking the question of 2/3 plus 1/4. And I'm going to give you a minute to think about which of the answer choices you see here, so 11/12, 3/12, or 3/7, is the correct answer, but also what visual representation might you sketch to show which answer is correct? And why do you think students might choose the other possible answer choices? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. Okay, so I realize you might still be thinking some about the incorrect choices and why students might choose them or your visual representation, but I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what we see from students when we give them problems like this. So of course, the correct answer here is 11/12, but there are a wide variety of ways that you or students might reason about this problem to get there. So for example, you could take the time to find common denominators and add 8/12 plus 3/12 to get 11/12, and many of you may have done that, and that's great and an important way to solve the problem. But also importantly, there are other strategies for approaching this problem related to the kind of strategies that Pam was highlighting with the apps. And these are also strategies that we want to encourage for students so they're really understanding what's happening with the fractions. So for example, students might place 2/3 on a number line and estimate where 1/4 further along the number line would be. Or they may know, with or without using a number line, that 2/3 is more than a half. And so then if you add something more to that, you're going to get something that is bigger than 2/3, or even just bigger than 1/2. And yet two of the other answer choices are less than half. Another example approach could be reasoning that 3/12 is equivalent to 1/4. So if you add something to 1/4, which would be like adding it to 3/12, then the answer could not be the 3/12, which is one of the possible answer options. So these are all kinds of reasoning and strategies you might hear from students, and that we would encourage them to be using as they work on this. But of course, that was detail about the correct understanding that might be elicited. And this formative assessment tool and these items are also particularly designed to identify what are some of the common misunderstandings students might have. And the incorrect answer choices are chosen very carefully for these items to see if students have those misunderstandings. So for example, you might have noticed that if students chose 3/7, it might be that they're overgeneralizing what they've learned about whole numbers. And so you've probably seen this with students or other children in your lives. They might just add the numerators and add the denominators. So they know that's what you're supposed to do when they add. So you add them and they get 3/7. But if students are doing this, it shows that they don't yet understand that the denominator represents the size of the parts being added and that the numerator is the number of parts. So similarly, we know that some students will know there is something they're supposed to do related to making the denominators the same, but if they don't really understand why or what they are doing with that procedure, they may create common denominators without ensuring they are making equivalent fractions while doing so. So for example, on the screen, if you look at the example on the left, which is for that same problem, this student has found the common denominator of 12ths, but they added 2/12 and 1/12. They have not recognized that the numerator would also change. And so instead, they just add the numerators to get 3/12, which is one of the possible answer choices. In addition, I want to highlight how asking students to draw visual representations on tasks like these formative assessment items can also yield information about students' approach and their understanding. So in the example on the right on the screen, a student has arrived at the correct answer for this task. In this case, they were adding 2/5 plus 1/3 and got 11/15. But we get to learn even more about their thinking because we can look at their visual representation and see details about how they found 2/5 to be equivalent to 6/15 and 1/3 to be equivalent to 5/15. So from their thinking tool from this problem, we're able to learn some more and think about what questions would we ask this student to further explore or advance their thinking. So after using formative assessments such as this one that I just showed, the next step is, of course, to consider how to support students to build from their current understandings. You saw some examples in the apps that Pam shared earlier, but the toolkit always offers resources based on whichever recommendation we're exploring that are specific to those ideas. So for example, there is a fraction addition app, which could be a follow-on to the formative assessment items we were just looking at. And this app allows students to visualize what happens when you add two fractions, including finding equivalent fractions with common denominators. So for a given fraction addition problem, such as 2/3 plus 1/4, students can see tape diagrams representing the two fractions. And then if we went into the app and took the next step, you would see that the tape diagrams can be combined and broken into more segments that represent the equivalent fractions with common denominators. So throughout the toolkit, there are activities and resources to support building students' understanding based on the kinds of common misunderstandings that are known to be pervasive for students from the research and that are identifiable using the formative assessment tools. So we hope this quick tour of the Teaching Fraction Toolkit resources has given you some picture of the ideas and strategies that are highlighted and the tools that are available. Here you can see some of the examples of what teachers who have participated in the past. Pull the ball out so you can see them all. What teachers have reflected on in their own experience with the toolkit. So you can see that teachers highlight how the materials and interactive tools are valuable and usable, and that they highlight the why behind the fraction concept. So we'll now turn to talking with a district leader and hearing her perspective as well.
Thank you, Johanna. I'm very honored to be able to engage in some questions and answers with our practitioner partner. Right now, I would like to introduce our next panelist, Morgan Allen, who brings 13 years of experience in education, all within Cincinnati Public Schools. Over the course of her career, She served in a variety of roles, including 7 years as a classroom teacher, 3 years as a school-based math specialist, and 3 years as a district elementary math coach. Across those roles, Morgan has focused on strengthening both student learning and teacher practice, with a strong emphasis on building deep conceptual understanding in mathematics. In her coaching work, she has partnered with schools to strengthen Tier 1 instruction, support data-driven decision-making, and provide targeted support that meets the needs of all learners. She is passionate about helping educators move beyond procedural teaching and toward meaningful, lasting mathematical understanding for students. Please join me in welcoming Morgan to the panel.
Oh, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Sometimes you need a little pep talk. We just got our scores back, so we needed, some bright spots and some places for growth.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Morgan. I'm going to ask you a few questions, but please feel free to elaborate and explain how these things have happened for you in your district. I'm going to start by asking about the challenges you see associated with learning and teaching of fractions. As the poll indicated, many of the participants in this webinar have also observed struggles that students have in that area.
All right. So I'm going to give a little background on Cincinnati Public Schools for people who aren't super familiar. So we are the second largest district in Ohio. We serve about 35,000, a little more than 35,000 kids, and have over 3,000 teachers. So we have a large variety of needs for students, and really a lot of teachers who are transitioning or shifting and have a lot of movement, especially with some of the different budget shifts that we had to make with the recent changes. So it's been a lot, and we're obviously pivoting and moving forward, but the fraction toolkit has been great. Some of the challenges that we saw, especially with math, is an area where you have a hard time finding people who are qualified to teach math instruction. And part of that is because a lot of people haven't understood fractions in particular in a conceptual way. And so our standards now have a new level of rigor where procedures do not cut it. And that is where teachers often fall back to the procedures of keep, change, flip, and whatever else, they saw cute on Teachers Pay Teachers. And so trying to really support teachers with understanding the math conceptually when they're often not super comfortable with the math, so that way they can support our students to understand the math conceptually has been a big focus for us.
That's excellent. So what are the resources in the toolkit that have been particularly helpful in supporting your teachers to instruct visually and to also engage in the conceptual understanding of fractions for their students?
So some of the great resources really is because the toolkit is really focused on making sure that people understand fractions conceptually. And so it's really hard to teach something when you don't understand something deeply. And so it really helps also teachers expand their thinking. So that way they can help support students better, and gives them a lot of practical resources. For example, like the GeoGebra tools, and also the formative assessments. We use lots of different tests in Cincinnati Public. A lot of them are based on the computer, and computer tests are great for lots of things, but they're not always great for understanding students' thinking. So those formative assessments are really helpful for kind of figuring out exactly what are the kids kind of thinking and what the thought process is, so that way we can offer targeted supports.
Excellent. How do you think the toolkit materials support the use of evidence-based strategies like the use of visual representations?
Yeah. So the toolkit really embeds using visual models and representations directly into the instruction. Teachers are working through problems and using those models. So it's not just, we're going to say, this is the model that you should use for this problem. They're actually going to use that models like tape diagrams and bar models and area models from the start. It's just jump straight in. It's also helping teachers understand the connection between those procedures that they have learned, and also the visual models that we're trying to get teachers and students to understand and use.
Excellent, excellent. This has been wonderful. And is there anything else you want to add? Any insights that you want to pass along to folks here before I pass it back to the rest of the team?
If you're on the fence, I would recommend just doing it. The worst thing that can happen is that you're in the same place, which I don't imagine that happening, especially with all the resources and the support from Pam and Johanna and Yen. They're really attentive and okay with adjusting and giving the content in lots of different formats. We had some things in person, we had some things virtual. Were able to meet at different times, fit in our teacher schedules. So if you're on the fence, just do it.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your time, Morgan. We know how precious it is in schools. I'm going to turn it back over to the rest of the team now to talk about some opportunities to engage in this work with us. So Yenmei, over to you.
Thank you, Pam. And thank you, Morgan. Now that you heard a little bit about the toolkit, you're more than welcome to explore the different resources provided by the toolkit on the website. But I want to now shift gears and talk briefly about an opportunity to engage more deeply with REL Midwest around the toolkit work. Next slide, please. So we are inviting district to partner with us to implement the toolkit in the summer and fall of 2026. As part of this partnership, grade 5 and 6 teachers can receive direct free professional learning from us, and the district leaders can also receive guidance and resources to help sustain and scale implementation. It's important to mention that this opportunity goes beyond just simply accessing the free online toolkit resources. So we at REL Midwest, we can work with your district to provide tailored professional learning and implementation support, including, for example, integrating the toolkit professional learning into your current PD schedule within your math curriculum. Next slide. Just briefly, the benefits for teacher from this opportunity are teachers, this offers opportunity for them to engage deeply with fractions content, strengthen their instructional practice within their existing curriculum, and learn how to monitor and support student understanding. They will also have the opportunity to collaborate with peers from other school districts and receive ready-to-use classroom resources associated with this toolkit. Next slide, please. So for districts, like I mentioned earlier, the benefits include tailored professional learning aligned to your schedule, receiving guidance on scaling and sustaining the work, and also tools and resources to support both leaders and teachers throughout the implementation. Next slide. So if you are in the Midwest region and if you are interested in receiving direct support from REL Midwest in implementing the toolkit in your school or district, receiving support from Pam, Johanna, and other math experts at REL Midwest, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact Max Pardo at the email address on the screen, or you can share your interest through the forum by just scanning the barcode on the screen or use the link provided in the chat as well. So we'd love to hear from you and we'll look forward to working with you on that. I will now turn it back to Emily, who will facilitate a Q&A session.
Thanks, everyone. So I'd like to invite our presenters to come back on video. And then for those of you in attendance, again, we are using the Q&A panel in Zoom. So as you think about fractions, it can be a question about the toolkit, but also even about fractions instruction. We have a lot of great experts here on the team. So one question that was in the Q&A panel was if the 6 modules in the toolkit need to be used in order or if you could use them independently.
I can start by taking that question. They are organized developmentally, and we invite 5th and 6th grade teachers to be engaged in this work. The concepts, when we first start, the first couple of modules really are focused in on locating and comparing fractions and setting the baseline using number lines that are really useful throughout the set of professional learning experiences, and they build into tools and visual representations for ratio, rate, and proportion. So it is best to go in order. However, we know that you may have different organization for it. You may want to do a couple of modules, the first two with some teachers, and then you may want to build off of that for your 6th and 7th grade teachers. So they're fully available to make those decisions locally. The other thing that I want to stress too is that these are professional learning resources. They are not a curricula, but you can use the activities here and embed them within your curricula. You can use the interactive apps and other tools, informative assessments to supplement or to enhance what you're doing in your curricula. So it's really helpful to dig into those, and your math coaches may find these tools to be great professional learning for themselves as they implement in the classroom and with their teachers. So that's the real power here, is that we can provide support to you directly through hybrid or online professional learning coming up in the summer or fall. But you also have the ability to take these resources and run with them as well.
We have some questions coming in about kind of the availability of resources. So I will clarify, and then I'll let the team also add in. So while the toolkit was developed through REL Midwest, it's posted on the website through the Institute of Education Sciences. And there are actually a number of other toolkits related to math as well as literacy instruction. And those toolkits are all similar to the fractions toolkit. Anyone can explore those. They're available for your use and adaptation. That's open to the whole country or even internationally. This specific opportunity to work with our REL Midwest coaches is open to those in our Midwest region. So we are bound by the region for that direct support. But again, if you're interested in the toolkit, anyone can access and use those. So I'll see if anybody else on the toolkit team wanted to add in to that.
Yeah, I just want to make note that on the next slide, which we'll get to momentarily, there's a link directly to those resources, and there are tabs for each section of the toolkit, which includes the background of these materials, tools to help guide and engage leaders. There are tools there, specifically a section for teachers for the professional learning materials. The facilitator guide is in a separate space for instructional leaders. And then there are an additional set of resources that really look at the trajectory of these ideas across time within your district. So there's really a rich set of resources, not just the professional learning. And as Emily said, these are open to anyone who goes to that website being hosted by the Institute of Education Sciences.
We had a question about how long one module might take to facilitate. So Pam or Johanna, I'm wondering if you guys have tips or suggestions if you were to use them live with a group of teachers.
I'm going to let Johanna take this, but I'll add if needed.
Sure. And so I think the question was specifically about doing the whole thing synchronously. So in general, the design of the modules is that there are 2 meetings that were designed from the beginning to be synchronous, and those are each for most modules 1 hour. So there's 2 hours of synchronous meetings in each module, although the first module, the very first meeting, is intended to be 2 hours. So there's 3 hours of synchronous meetings for that one. If you're trying to do the asynchronous parts, which would be the interim activities that come between meetings, synchronously as well, like doing them within a meeting setting, then you'd want to allow another 1 to 3 hours like built into that day. But you'd have to keep in mind that some of the interim activities are designed to be opportunities for teachers to go try something in their classroom and then bring back ideas or strategies or student work from that trying. So there's those little pieces couldn't be done in just a synchronous workshop day, for example. So you'd have to make modifications or design around that a bit. Pam, anything to add?
I was just going to add that in the facilitator guide, it actually outlines how long it's estimated for each of those particular sets of activities. And again, there are nice organizational charts and things like that to help you know what we had intended, but there is flexibility based on your local conditions.
And Pam, I think that ties into some of the questions for folks attending who are outside of our region. We're sorry that we can't meet virtually with everyone, but we've really designed the toolkit materials to be with a lot of facilitator guides, a lot of information that really help to scaffold. So I just wondered if you wanted to speak to kind of how easy would it be for someone who's not working with a REL Midwest coach to just kind of pick it up and take it to their team?
That's a great question. In fact, we thought about that as well. And so we have a document in the resources that outlines if you want to facilitate this, who should you go to? What should you consider in terms of setting up the professional learning? What is a suggested schedule? Here are templates to set that up. What's good professional learning look like for this set of resources? And then the facilitator guides. As Johanna pointed out, on every one of the modules, we have specific guidance. Here's the activity. Here are some talking points. Here are some tips. Here's what the evidence says in the practice guide. So it's extensive support materials for each of those modules. But again, it's really nice that it's not just the thing, here's the PD for teachers, the workbook and so on. Here's how you can help support it. And then here are the organizational or systemic things that need to be in place that are helpful. And it's kind of, we have suggested trajectory of these things, but I have worked in districts for over 40 years as in all of the kinds of ways that Morgan was outlined. She's worked. And I know that you adjust based on who are your students, how do we meet their needs, who are your teachers. And so we provide some tips to help identify how to use those resources as well.
Great, thank you, Pam. And then Yinmei, we had a question of when people should reach out to us about the REL Midwest opportunity. Is there a certain date by which we would hope to hear from people?
So we are now, basically, they can reach out us to now. So we are thinking of giving in the PD to start probably late summer and also into the fall. So as soon as you can let us know and contact us, and we can set up separate meetings to talk about your specific needs. So contact us now.
Great. Well, with that, I want to just once again, just thank our presenters. Thank you, Morgan, especially for giving time out of your day to share that valuable educator perspective. We've had a few questions about the recording. Rest assured, we are recording today's webinar. We'll be archiving it as well as the slides and putting it on the REL Midwest website. And we do plan to email everyone who both registered and attended this webinar, so you'll get a direct email as soon as those are live. So we appreciate your interest in sharing those with other colleagues and educators. Next slide, please. Just to close, I will put into the chat one more time the link to the Teaching for Actions Toolkit. Again, this is free for you to use and explore. We also, again, want to just point you to other math resources. If you work with students beyond 6th grade, there are some other great math resources from our other REL colleagues. And if you're interested in this opportunity to work with REL Midwest, you can reach out to Max Pardo. His information is listed there. And with that, I just want to thank everyone. Again, thank you for giving your time. Thank you for all the hard work you do as educators and leaders. And also want to highlight for you that there's another math-related webinar coming up this week. Our colleagues at REL Central are doing one about algebra instruction in middle and high school. So if this is a topic that's of interest, again, I'll put the link in the chat. We encourage you to sign up and attend that, or at least register to get the archive recording of that. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to all of our presenters.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.